contact with Michael Jackson during that period of time?
Not much.
Did you spoke to him on occasion?
On occasion, yes.
You also said that your next tour with Michael Jackson was the History Tour. Is that right?
Yes.
What was your role in that tour?
That tour was in two legs. On the first leg, I worked for the worldwide promoter, Marcel Abram. And on the second leg, I was the tour executive.
And the reason for the change in the job on the second tour was second leg was why?
Objection relevant.
I will move the objection within 352. You may answer it.
So again,
The
question,
reason
sir?
you changed jobs in the second leg of the tour.
That's the job that they needed me for.
Was it a promotion, or was it just a different job?
Well, there were some problems on the tour, financial problems, and I was brought in to straighten them out.
During that period of time, did you have occasion to interact with Michael Jackson?
Yes.
On many occasions?
Yes.
You spoke to him quite a bit?
Especially in the second half of it, yes.
Okay. When were you asked to handle the production on the This Is It series of shows?
Right from the start,
Right from the start. And you currently are employed by whom?
AEG Live,
Okay. And how long have you been employed by AEG Live?
11, 12 years.
You recall during the Dangerous Tour and the History Tour that Kenny Ortega was also involved?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Mr. Gongaware, when you were asked to take over the production, did you have any reservations about that?
Objection relevant.
Sustained. 350.
One of the questions that was asked of you by the prosecution was that on one occasion you saw that Michael Jackson looked a little intoxicated, a little out of it, glassy-eyed.
Objection to take the testimony.
I think you're going to have to refine the time frame. Sustained.
You said that one time you saw Michael Jackson and he looked a little intoxicated. Is that fair?
That's not the word I used, sir.
What word did you use?
I don't recall the word I used, but what I saw was just a little bit of a slower speech pattern, just a slight slur in his speech.
And you also testified that you found out that at that time that Michael Jackson had just come from Dr. Klein's office.
That's correct.
Now, you were certainly on the lookout for any drug use by Michael Jackson, were you?
Yes, I was.
And in fact, you had reservations about handling the production if you observed drug use.
That's right.
That was one of the concerns that you had.
Yes.
Did you ever address issues with Dr. Klein with anyone at AEG?
Objection relevant.
Sustained. 352 as well.
In the meetings that you had in June, first week of June, and the second meeting that you were not attended at, was one of the topics to discuss Dr. Arnold Klein?
Objection relevant.
Sustained.
Let me ask you this specific question. Did you ever tell Dr. Murray anything about Dr. Klein?
Objection relevant.
Overruled.
No.
When you did have interaction with Dr. Murray, you observed that he was concerned about Michael Jackson.
Yes.
And he wanted to do what was best for Michael Jackson.
That was my impression, yes.
Was it your impression that Dr. Murray treated Michael Jackson as a friend? They were friends?
I didn't have an opinion on that.
Were you friends with Michael Jackson? Would you consider your relationship a friend relationship?
It was a business relationship, but it was very friendly.
When you wanted to get hold of Michael Jackson, how would you do that?
If he was at rehearsals, I'd just go see him.
All right, and otherwise?
If I needed to talk to him, I would talk to his assistant, Michael Lemire Williams, and he would set it up.
He would set it up by getting hold of Michael or scheduling a time for you to talk to him?
Yes.
The meeting that was scheduled, that you attended in early June of 2009, you have testified that some of the topics that were involved there, but that meeting was actually pushed by Kenny Ortega, wasn't it?
Kenny was the one who asked for the meeting, yes.
And Kenny's concerns were that at the time, Michael Jackson was missing rehearsal. That was one of his concerns.
Yes.
Did anybody ever get to the bottom of why Michael Jackson was missing rehearsals?
Objection made.
Sustained.
Well, was that a topic of conversation at the early June meeting at Carrollwood?
I don't recall that. I think the early June meeting was a positive meeting, and Michael was very positive about it.
Who was at that early June meeting?
Michael, Dr. Murray, Frank DeLeo, Randy Phillips, myself.
Do you recall at that meeting there was a discussion about Michael Jackson's schedule?
I don't specifically recall that.
Do you recall that there was a conversation by Dr. Murray about Michael Jackson needing to spend more time with his children? Do you remember that?
Not specifically.
One moment, please. I'm trying to find something that may have fallen off a location. And the overhead? One of the jurors is bringing that for attention. It can get very distracting and disruptive. Done, as you speak. Did we recover the item that dropped? Good enough. Sorry for the interruption, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine. Mr. Geiger, you were aware that I'll get to that in a second. Let's talk about the conversations that you did have with Dr. Murray about Michael Jackson. You talked to him. Did you ever talk to Dr. Murray about Michael Jackson's health?
Not so much about his health, no.
Or what in particular did you talk to him about?
Well, I talked to him about being willing to get him whatever he needed to do what he had to do.
Was it in your past history with tours and Michael Jackson's tours? Was it unusual to have a doctor available for the tour?
No, it was not unusual.
When you spoke to Dr. Murray about, at the time that you called Dr. Murray to discuss with him the option of him joining the tour, being Michael Jackson's doctor, was that a cold call?
The first call, sir?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, it was a cold call, yes, but I was instructed by Michael to call him.
It was Michael Jackson who told you call Dr. Murray.
Yes.
And you were given the phone number to call Dr. Murray at it.
Yes.
And you called him cold. He didn't know. He wasn't expecting you to call.
That's correct.
And you proposed this particular idea that he was to be Michael Jackson's doctor. That was the idea of the artist.
Yes.
And did you tell him what you thought his services were worth at that time?
No.
Did you say to him, well, we are prepared perhaps to give a range of this amount?
No, I just asked him what he wanted.
You basically took a doctor and you asked him right off on the phone, one phone call, what do you want, essentially?
Yes, sir.
And Dr. Murray at that point said, $5 million.
That's correct.
And that was it. That was a non-starter for you, right?
Yes.
That was way too much.
That's right.
In your mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you certainly don't know whether Dr. Murray has ever been a personal doctor for a famous individual on a world tour before, right?
Objection relevant.
Do you know whether he's ever been...
I'll overrule the objection if you understand it. You may answer it.
I'm not sure I
Well,
understand, sir.
did you know Dr. Murray's experience when you called him? Did you
No.
know what he...
No.
Did you know what kind of medicine he was involved in?
No.
Do you know how many practices he might have had?
No.
Did you know the value of his practices?
No.
After you said, no, that's a non-starter, Dr. Murray didn't come up with a different figure, did he?
No.
He didn't then call you on a regular basis and ask you, hey, look, maybe I'll take a little less. In fact, he never called you at all.
That's correct.
And you just dropped it.
That's right.
And you let it go. You had better things to worry about than hiring a personal doctor.
Yes.
So, you didn't call Dr. Murray. Dr. Murray didn't call you for weeks. A couple of weeks.
That's right.
And it was only when Michael Jackson called you through Michael Amir that the issue came up again.
That's correct.
And then when that occurred, that's when you called Dr. Murray again.
Yes.
Now, when recall, Dr. Murray, you had a figure in mind of what to offer.
Yes,
Because Michael Jackson had told you offer him $150,000,
that's correct.
right? So essentially you were a conduit for that information.
Yes.
When you told Dr. Murray that you were offering him $150,000 the first time, did you tell him that that was Michael Jackson's offer or AEG's offer?
I just told him I was authorized to offer him that amount.
And when you told him that Michael Jackson was offering $150,000, that's when he accepted.
That's correct.
Now, you didn't expect at that point Dr. Murray to say, well, wait a minute, that may be too much. How about $40,000?
Objection relevant.
Argumentative. Sustained.
He took it. He took what you offered him.
Yes, he did.
Do you have any idea what Dr. Murray's practices are worth?
Objection relevant. Calls for speculation.
I'll overrule the objection. You may answer.
No idea.
Did you ever have any conversation with Dr. Murray about the value of his practices?
No.
Objection asked and answered. Move to
Sorry.
Overruled. The answer remains.
On the second conversation with Dr. Murray, was there at that point, did you finally understand what Dr. Murray did for a living, his specialty in medicine?
No.
You didn't know he was a cardiologist at that time either?
At that time, I don't believe I did.
$150,000 was offered over 10 months. Is that right?
My impression was it was $150,000 a month, but I didn't specify how many months. I didn't know how many months this was going to go.
The contract was not unlimited. It wasn't for the rest of your life. It was limited in time, was it not?
I didn't read the final contract, so I don't know what it said.
Do you know how long, and we've gone through the schedule of This Is It, but I didn't really pay attention to when it ended. How long was This Is It shows, were they going to last?
Well, we were scheduled through early March, but there were plans to continue.
Fine. Have you had occasion to see this completed contract between AEG and Conrad Murray? Have you seen
No,
it?
I haven't seen it.
Mr. Conway, you were accompanied today by your lawyer.
That's correct.
It's just kind of
relevant.
Sustained. 352.
Move to strike.
Motion to strike. It's that last answer stricken. It is to be disregarded.
are you being sued?
Objection relevant.
Sustained.
Well, if he is,
Mr. Long, I don't want to hear any arguments. If counsel want to approach, you can approach. You want to approach?
please.
Thank you.
I just have three questions, Mr. Gonware, about this. You currently work for AEG.
AEG Live.
AEG Live. And AEG Live is part of a lawsuit currently involving this situation.
Yes, sir.
In fact, AEG Live is being sued by Catherine Jackson.
That's right.
Are you familiar with the allegations that are being made?
The objection is sustained at this point under 350 and 352.
May I have a second, Judge?
You may.
Mr. Gonware, I want to make sure that I've asked this right. I may not have asked it correct the first time. You were not, would it be fair to say you were not involved at all in the creation of the contract or circumstances of the contract or terms of the contract between AEG and Dr. Conrad Murray?
That's correct.
Objection, you state the testimony.
Is that your testimony today, that you
You
were
may
not
answer.
involved?
Could
Is
you
that a correct statement?
could you repeat that, sir?
Were you involved in the formation of the contract between Dr. Murray and AEG Live, or AEG?
No.
The objection is overruled.
Do you have any personal information about the provisions and clauses and information in the contract between AEG and Dr. Conrad Murray?
Objection asked and answered.
Overruled.
Please answer.
No.
Thank you, Mr. Conway.
Chair, thank you. Ms. Brazil, redirect, please.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Mr. Gongaware, when you met at Carrollwood in early June, the topic of your discussion about what you could do as the production team to get Michael Jackson what he needed to succeed in his rehearsals, that included things such as nutrition and sufficient rest and scheduling, correct?
Yes.
Mr. Gongaware, defense counsel asked you about your impression of Dr. Murray's relationship with Mr. Jackson, and you described it as friendly and caring, correct? Do you understand my question?
I understand your question. I'm not exactly sure what I said, but it was. Yes.
Let me ask it again. Defense counsel asked you to characterize your observations of Dr. Murray and his relationship with Mr. Jackson, and I believe you agreed that it was a caring relationship that you observed. Do I have that accurate?
Yes, it was.
Mr. Gongaware, did you have any idea when you met with Mr. Jackson and the others who were concerned about Mr. Jackson's health when Conrad Murray was present, that Conrad Murray was giving Mr. Jackson nightly doses of propofol?
I had no idea.
When you contacted Conrad Murray to engage his services as a personal physician for Mr. Jackson at Mr. Jackson's request, was Dr. Conrad Murray surprised when you reached out to him to negotiate a contract for his services as a personal physician?
Calls for speculation as to what Dr. Conrad Murray felt, thought, his state of mind.
I'll sustain the objection to the characterization. You can ask in terms of 800 of the evidence code. There's an issue of lay opinion.
Mr. Gongaware, when you called Conrad Murray to initiate the discussions concerning his services as a personal physician for Mr. Jackson, when you introduced yourself, do you have an opinion whether or not Conrad Murray seemed surprised that you were contacting him to discuss possibly retaining his services?
Objection, speculation.
Overall, it's 800. You may answer it if you're able.
I didn't sense that he was surprised.
Did you have to go into a long and elaborate explanation as to why you were calling?
No.
And just so we're clear, it is Conrad Murray who said, I need $5 million a year for my services, correct?
That's correct.
You testified that in your experience it is not unusual to have an artist or a performer retain the services of a personal physician. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
In your experience, is $5 million a year a usual sum for physicians for 1 year time?
No.
It's not unusual, or it is unusual?
It is quite unusual.
How so? Too high or too low?
Oh, way too high.
Thank you, Mr. Gongaware.
Ms. Brazil, thank you. Mr. Chernoff, recross exam.
In reality, Dr. Murray could have asked for $100 billion. It still would have been a ridiculous amount for you, correct?
It's argumentative.
$5 million is just a ridiculous amount, right?
In my opinion.
Yeah, it is. In fact, you didn't know exactly what you needed to pay a doctor either, did you?
I have a general idea.
Your general idea was based on not only past experience, but you also made a couple phone calls
I made one phone call, yes.
to a doctor.
To a doctor, yes.
And this was between the period of time, the offer of $5 million and ultimately the $150,000.
Yes.
At the time that Michael Jackson was asking for a personal physician, the discussion that was had with Michael Jackson about why he needed that involved his health. Is that right?
Yes.
Let me go. I want to be more specific because I don't want to misstate what you said yesterday. Michael Jackson said, "My body is a machine. I need it to be fine-tuned," or something. He said something like that.
He said we need to take care of the machine.
Was there any further discussion about complaints or concerns or medical disabilities or conditions that he had?
No, sir.
There was no conversation about that at all. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chernoff, thank you. Ms. Brazil, is there any redirect?
No, thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Will Mr. Gongaware step down subject to recall, Ms. Brazil?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Chernoff?
Yes,
Thank you. Mr. Gongaware, I want to thank you for your testimony. So please don't discuss your testimony or the facts of the case with any other witnesses until we finish the trial. And while you may step down and leave, you are to remain on call during the rest of the case, and you're subject to recall if necessary. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Ms. Brazil, Mr. Waldron.
Thank you, Ron. People call Kathy Jory.
And would counsel be kind enough to retrieve the exhibit, please? Thank you. Sure. You may.
Would you please stand in the witness box?
Yes.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you may give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated.
Thank you.
Please state your name for the record. Spell your first and last names.
Kathy Jory, Kathyjorrie.
Ms. Jury, good morning.
Good morning,
Let
Your
me
Honor.
provide you with some instructions, which I give to every witness in every case. The first of which is to please sit back and relax. The second of which is to speak in a loud voice. That'll help us out. The third, try to avoid answering questions or They can be very confusing. And the last, please wait until you hear an entire question before you even start to answer. In our daily lives, a lot of us are used interrupting each other because we think we can anticipate the whole question. But in a courtroom, it's important to wait for the entire question to be asked before even starting to answer. Is that all okay?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ms. Brazil, direct exam.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Joy.
Good morning.
Please tell us what you do for a living.
I am a lawyer.
And where are you employed?
I'm a partner at the law firm of Luce Forward, Hamilton and Scripps, and I'm in charge of their Los Angeles office.
Ms. Jory, in June of 2009, were you requested to draft an employment contract between Michael Joseph Jackson and Dr. Conrad Murray?
Yes. What did you refer to the contract as? I'm sorry, if you could restate your question.
An employment contract?
No.
Contract for services?
Was not an employment contract. It was a contract for services.
And who requested that you draft a contract for services involving Mr. Jackson and Dr. Conrad Murray?
My client, AEG Live.
Is it usual and customary to have an outside legal service such as yourself prepare contracts for a corporation?
Yes, it is.
Were you provided with the basic information in order to create a draft of the contract for services between the parties?
Yes.
And who provided you with that information?
A gentleman named Tim Woolley who worked with AEG Live.
When did you begin drafting the contract for services between the parties?
To my best recollection, it was in May-June time frame.
So describe for me how the drafting of the contract began.
Well, first I received information from Mr. Woolley about the basic terms of the agreement. Then I took that information after asking questions and getting answers from him, and I drafted the agreement.
And what did you do with the agreement once you completed your draft?
I emailed a copy of the agreement to Mr. Woolley and others at AEG Live to review.
At some point, did your draft of the contract reach Dr. Murray, to your knowledge?
Yes.
And how did that come about?
In my email to Mr. Woolley, I asked him to review, provide comments, and if he was satisfied with the contract, to please forward it to Mr. Murray, to Dr. Murray.
And to your knowledge, did Mr. Woolley forward the contract, or the draft that you had created to Dr. Murray?
Yes.
And how did you become aware that that was happening?
I received a call from Dr. Murray to discuss the draft that he had received from Mr. Woolley.
And then at some point subsequent, did you have conversations or communication directly with Conrad Murray through a telephonic contact?
Yes.
Did you also have direct email contact back and forth with Conrad Murray concerning any future revisions to the draft?
Yes.
Ms. Joy, does it sound accurate that you first created the draft and sent it to Mr. Woolley on June 15th of 2009?
I did email it on June 15th of 2009 to Mr. Woolley.
Generally, the contract provisions included a start date, correct?
Are you asking about this contract or general?
This contract. Specifically, I'm focusing on the contract that you drafted between Mr. Jackson and Conrad Murray. What was the start date for Conrad Murray's services?
The start date was when all three parties signed the contract, because the contract specifically stated that it wasn't effective until signed by Dr. Murray, AEG Live, Dr. Murray's company, GCA, and Michael Jackson himself. So that's a little bit of a tricky question, because the parties had agreed that the payment to Dr. Murray, when and if the contract became valid and enforceable, would start as of May 1st, 2009, so he would be paid retroactively.
That was what I was getting to. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for clarifying that. So, irrespective of the contract becoming activated, Dr. Murray was contemplating compensation from a period retroactively May 1st, 2009. Is that accurate?
Yes.
What was the agreed upon compensation that was captured in the contract for Dr. Murray?
$150,000 a month for the term of the contract.
And what was the term of the contract to be? We know that it would begin his compensation May 1st, 2009. What was the provision in the contract regarding the end of his services?
In the initial draft of the contract, the end of the services would have been September 30th, 2009, and through subsequent discussions with Dr. Murray, the end of the term was modified in the next draft to be, if I recall correctly, March 6, 2010, which would have been the end of the second leg of the This Is It shows at the O2 Arena.
Was there a negotiation point concerning the payment that you just described between you and Dr. Murray?
There was.
Describe that, please.
Well, that conversation occurred, let's see, that was actually the second round of changes, so it would have been the second day in which I spoke to Dr. Murray. And the conversation that I had with him was, he contacted me on my cell phone, and he had a number of revisions that he would like me to make to the contract. Focusing on that particular change, Dr. Murray had requested that I modify the contract to have an end date on March 6, 2010. And I asked him whether or not he spoke to Michael Jackson about that. And he told me he had. He spoke with Michael Jackson. Indeed, he told me he had reviewed the entire agreement with Michael Jackson. And I asked him whether Michael Jackson has indicated a willingness to pay the $150,000 a month during that period of time, because there was a lag period of a few months.
And let me stop you for a second.
Sure.
You're referring to the period of October, November, and December when the performances at the O2 Arena would be on hiatus. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And
Clarify the term hiatus for some of us.
yes, Ms. Jory, the concert would be on a break during the months of October, November, and December. There would be no performances by the This Is It concert, correct?
That's right.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, Dr. Murray was requesting that he be paid during that period, correct?
Yes.
And you were stating that you had queried Dr. Murray whether he had discussed payment with Mr. Jackson during the downtime from the concert, correct?
That's correct.
And how did that resolve?
Dr. Murray explained to me that he had spoke to Michael Jackson about that, and yes, Michael said he was willing to pay for Dr. Murray's services during that hiatus, and all the way through March 6, 2010.
Just so I'm clear on the negotiating and drafting time frame, you created your first draft and sent it off for approval to Mr. Woolley and Conrad Murray on June 15th, 2009, correct?
Correct.
And the final contract was signed and returned to you by Dr. Murray on June 24th, 2009, correct?
Yes, in the evening.
So in that time period, we're talking about your communication with Dr. Murray directly, telephonically, and by email would have occurred between June 15th and June 24th. Is that accurate?
Correct.
During your telephonic conversation with Dr. Murray while you were discussing the changes in the compensation that you just described for us, what other negotiation conversations did you have with Dr. Murray on that date?
So the second time was
Yes.
the second draft.
The second draft.
He requested that the date where it said dated as of be May 1st in the contract, signifying that his compensation would be retroactive to May 1st. So I made that change to the contract and then dated the contract on the date of signature that he intended to sign.
And you also mentioned there was a change to the company name involving Conrad Murray. Is that accurate?
We had two conversations about changes to the contract. We had a conversation on June 18, which preceded the conversation I just described to you, where Dr. Murray and I spoke about several different things, including changes to the contracts, questions I had about the contract, etc. And then we had another conversation on June 23rd, because on June 18, after we spoke, I revised the contract, I emailed it to Dr. Murray, and then he called me again about that draft with some further changes.
Very
just
well.
to clarify.
Very well. Let's focus on the conversation that you had with Dr. Murray on June 18th. Can we focus on that date?
Yes.
I'd like to have you describe the changes that were made and requested by Conrad Murray during that June 18th conversation, please. And you described the termination, you described the compensation, and that was on the June 18th date conversation. Or do I have that wrong?
You have that
Okay.
wrong. I'm sorry.
No
That was on
problem
June
necessary.
23rd.
Yes. Let's focus on June 18th. Describe for me the contract changes that you discussed with Conrad Murray.
Okay, on June 18, Conrad Murray contacted me, and we spoke about some changes he requested to the contract, some questions I had, and him and Michael Jackson. So focusing just on the changes that he requested, is that you want me to
Yes.
limit? Okay. On that day, Dr. Murray had asked me to make 4 or 5 revisions to the draft contract that was provided to him. One of them was he had requested that instead of having Dr. Murray on the contract, he requested that a company that he was involved with, GCA Holdings, be a contracting party, to which I responded that I could add his company on the contract, but I would need him also to be a signatory and a party to the contract. That's one change.
Yes.
The next change he requested was there's a provision in the contract that provides that AEG Live Productions would provide a nurse during the term. And Dr. Murray had asked me to modify that part of the contract to, instead of identifying a nurse, it would identify a medical assistant. And in our conversations, he explained to me that he might want to hire a physician instead of a nurse. I asked him why.
What was his response?
He told me that if he was tired or unavailable, he wanted to make sure that there was somebody else available to be of assistance. And we're focusing our conversation on London.
Yes.
At that time. Some of the other changes he wanted to make, there was a provision in the contract, Section 7.7, which provided that the way that he wanted to change this particular provision so that in the event his services were terminated based upon 2 other provisions in the contract, if Michael Jackson decided he no longer wanted Dr. Murray to be his doctor, there was a right to terminate the contract immediately. If the tour was canceled for any reason, there was a right to terminate the contract immediately. And Dr. Murray wanted a provision in there that said if that termination for those reasons occurred after his monthly payment date of the 15th of the month, that he would not be required to refund that portion of the monthly fee.
So in simple terms, you were discussing with him how he would be paid or owe money in case he was terminated in the middle of a month, correct?
Yes. Yes, and then we talked about that.
And how did that resolve?
Well, I had said, Dr. Murray, $150,000 is a lot of money, And
What was his response?
his response was that he was leaving 4 medical practices in order to go on tour with Michael Jackson. And so it seemed fair and appropriate to him in those instances, if his services were terminated in those instances, that he would not be required to refund that portion of the month.
Have we covered all of the contractual changes that Dr. Murray requested during your June 18th telephone conversation with him?
The material ones, we did talk about other provisions in the contract, though.
Generally, you incorporated the changes that we've discussed, and did you create an additional draft or a final copy to send off to Dr. Murray for his signature?
On that day, I revised the contract. I emailed it to Dr. Murray, and he called me again with further revisions on the 23rd.
On June 23rd, did you have a conversation with Dr. Murray regarding any medical equipment that was to be a provision in the contract?
That conversation was on June 18th.
Let's go back to June 18th. I'd like to discuss the medical equipment. Did you have a conversation with Dr. Murray regarding medical equipment to be included as a provision in the contract with him?
I did.
And what was that conversation?
There was a provision in the contract that identified certain equipment that I understood Dr. Murray had identified. And I had put that information into the contract. I wanted to know why he needed that medical equipment, so I asked him.
What medical equipment are you referring to?
Well, there's a provision in the contract that identifies different equipment, including a cardiopulmonary resuscitation machine, a CPR machine. And I asked Dr. Murray, why do you need a CPR machine? And we had a conversation about that.
Did it seem unusual to you that a private physician was asking for a CPR machine? Is that why you asked him about it?
That's 2 questions. Could you just
Yes.
remind me?
Ms. Dory, why did you ask Dr. Murray about the CPR machine that he requested in his contract?